Hi there, my name is Eros Elizabeth Bathory, former Hell Priest of the OSU Satanic Temple. Now that the spring semester is over and summer is finally here, I figured it was time for a change in scenery. This is Baphomet behind me right here. I was going to have a green screen for this, but the green screen was pissing me off, so I ripped it off the walls and now we have Baphomet here. Some big improvements are coming to the channel, if you couldn't tell, like the fact that I am not in my bedroom anymore. I gutted out my mom's basement and converted a corner of it into my office space for making YouTube videos. I always planned to pretty much do this for the longest time. The only reason why I decided to do it now is because as of filming, I obviously moved out of my dorm room and my bedroom is a bit of a mess right now, so I won't be recording stuff in there for a bit. I'm also going to be trying to add a little more substance to my editing and overall visual style. Now that I'm out of college, I can finally put all my attention and all my effort into making sure I put out the best videos for you guys. As I found out the hard way with the Iceberg Power Hour video, I need to put a little more focus on quality rather than quantity. But that's enough yapping about the behind the scenes bullshit. I'm more excited to announce that I'm finally starting a new Iceberg series. For the next few weeks, I am going to be looking into the unsolved serial killer Iceberg. America tends to romanticize your typical mid-Bundys, your cannibalistic twink killers, and the occasional harbingers of both vengeance and retribution. Instead of hopping on the trend of just rehashing their stupid-ass sob stories, I wanted to focus more on the killers who got the job done and both successfully and tragically evaded the law. For today's video, we are going to be looking through tiers 1 through 3. This video might turn out to be a little bit shorter than I predicted, so if that's the case, I'm sorry in advance. I'm just trying to get a bit of a feel for how fast, or rather, how slow this iceberg is going to come along, because with the way this iceberg is looking, I'm expecting to make at least 6 parts out of it, including this video. I think that's all I have to say. I won't take up any more of your time with this intro. Let's just look into the surface level of this iceberg. Jack the Ripper was responsible for the murders of at least 5 confirmed female victims between mid to late 1888. These murders all took place within Whitechapel, London, a very infamously impoverished part of London at the time. These victims were typically found with their throats slit and their bodies mutilated, with some of their organs removed with an almost surgeon-like precision. Some of these organs would be sent to the police alongside a bunch of letters taunting the police for getting away with the murder and never being caught. It's also through these letters that Jack gave himself the name Jack the Ripper. Jack gained the notoriety he did due to the constant popcorn headlines surrounding his murder scenes. Eventually, the fact that he also committed these murders in a very poor part of London began to turn Jack the Ripper into a bit of a Candyman-type social commentary slasher killer. Jack's killings eventually became a bit of a symbol for how the rich upper class would murder the lower class for some kind of sick sexual thrill. There were a shit ton of people who were heavily theorized to be the killer, which is something I'm going to be trying to prevent myself from saying a shit ton throughout this series. But the most popular suspect I want to talk about in this video in particular is a man by the name of James Maybrick. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but you're going to want to keep this in mind for later on within this video. The only reason why Maybrick was so popular is because there was supposedly a diary found hidden within his home where he confessed to being Jack the Ripper and described all the murders in great detail. The only issue being, this diary was only found after he died, after he was poisoned to death by his wife. What I'm more concerned about is, I don't know if it's just because of how vocabulary and culture has evolved as people, but when I'm imagining this dude writing about the killings in his diary, I don't imagine it like it's some kind of some Elliot Rodger fucking Day of Retribution bullshit. I imagine this dude just writing his diary like,
oh my god, I just killed a bunch of women in Whitechapel. The police still haven't caught me yet, fucking idiot.
I slaughtered those whores like livestock.
In all seriousness, this diary causes a lot of discourse within the Ripperologist community, which is dedicated to figuring out the identity of Jack the Ripper. Can't believe I shouldn't have had to explain that to you guys, but yeah. There's a lot of back and forth whether or not this diary is legitimate or not, because the guy who found it said that he did find the diary legitimately, but then he would go back on his word saying that he made up the whole thing, and then go back to saying that he did actually find the diary. So Maybrick, I mean, either way, Maybrick died before anything could come up with him being the suspect. So the Zodiac Killer doesn't really need any kind of proper introduction, much like Jack the Ripper. He attacked at least 7 confirmed victims, 5 of whom died, and he himself claims that he killed 37, which is a very weird way for him to jerk off his own ego. These murders also took place in Northern California in the 1960s, and he also sent a bunch of letters to the police as well. What makes the Zodiac so recognizable is the fact that these letters were accompanied by cryptograms and ciphers, where he would send the police on a Magic Mountain treasure hunt to figure out his identity and where he would strike next. I feel that it's important to note with this topic that the Zodiac was usually described as being a bit of a heavyset white guy with reddish-brownish hair and sometimes thick glasses. This description was more notably given when the Zodiac had shot a taxi driver by the name of Paul Stein in the back of the head. The only reason why I'm bringing up this incident in particular is because of the fact that by some weird magical bit of confusion, the police thought that they were looking for a black guy. There were 2 cops in particular who have gone on record to say that they saw the fucking big heavyset white guy with reddish brownish hair, but they let him go because they were assigned to look for a black dude. I gotta find a way to hide this fucking thing.
Hey, you there.
Oh shit.
You seen a big white guy, reddish brownish hair? He might have shot the taxi driver down the street a few minutes ago.
No, officer, I have not. But it could be any one of us.
No shit, that's why we're looking for him. Think you can keep your eyes peeled for the black guy who did this? I'm sorry, what?
We don't know for certain what this guy looks like, you know? It doesn't have to necessarily be a person of color. It could be...
Don't go talking crazy now. We all know those blacks have a shifty history of being violent.
Jesus fucking Christ, I'll definitely keep a lookout.
Okie dokie then. You walk on home safe then, you hear? It's a pretty bad neighborhood, especially at night.
Yeah, thank you, officer. Thought I was a monster. The most popular suspect who is widely believed to be the Zodiac is a man by the name of Arthur Lee Allen, a sex offender and elementary school teacher. Former elementary school teacher and sex offender. The only real evidence that ties Allen to even at all being the Zodiac is the fact that he went to some of the locations where some of the attacks took place. And just in general, he was a bit of a sketchy guy. And obviously, you know, he was a fucking sex offender. But the only reason why he wasn't really properly charged or confirmed to be the Zodiac is the fact that DNA tests confirmed that he didn't match the DNA left behind on some of the letters. Plus, some of the victims said that Allen didn't match the descriptions of the guy that attacked them when the Zodiac did. As a bonus piece of trivia, Ted Kaczynski, Ted Bundy, and even some of the Manson family were considered as suspects for being the Zodiac, but as cool as that would be, very obviously, they were confirmed and disproven immediately that they were not suspects to be the Zodiac. While Allen is the go-to suspect for being the Zodiac Killer, he passed away of a heart attack in 1992. So these theories about whether or not Allen did the murders or not, they remain unsolved. The Atlanta Ripper is a case that caused a lot of widespread fear throughout America when it happened, but thanks to the sensationalization of more modern killers like John Wayne Gacy and Dahmer, this case kind of got pushed back into the shadows and kind of slowly got forgotten about by a majority of Americans, which is a little sad to think about, in my opinion. So between 1909 and 1915, there was a string of at least 15 connected murders that took place within Atlanta, Georgia. The victims consisted primarily of African-American women who were all found with their throats slit and their bodies mutilated, reminiscent of Jack the Ripper. As a result of these murders, the black people within the area began to avoid being out late at night and hid behind the comfort of their homes out of fear that they would be killed next by the Ripper. The body count got so high that even despite the racist state America was in at the time, both the white community and the black community came together in solidarity to try and figure out who this guy was and put him behind bars. Although, since we're here, very obviously their efforts proved to be unsuccessful, unfortunately. The Atlanta Ripper is going to be the first among many other cases where there was no real suspect that was strongly believed to be the killer. The only real person I feel would be important enough to include as a topic on here is a man by the name of Todd Henderson, but the only reason why I'm bringing him up is because of the hilarious way he denied being the killer.
I need answers, Henderson. Did you murder all these women?
Hell no. If I was gonna kill anybody, I'd kill my wife, am I right, fellas? I fucking hate my wife. The Gilgo Beach killings were a set of murders that took place within Long Island, New York. This is going to be our first really extremely recent set of murders so far within this Iceberg series, as the killings took place within 1996 to 2011. There are at least 11 confirmed victims under this killer's belt, with the last 4 being found around the same place between 2010 to 2011. This case is also special due to the fact that as of January of this year, someone was actually successfully identified and charged with the murder of the 4 victims I had previously mentioned. A 59-year-old man by the name of Rex Hewerman was charged with the murders of Melissa Barthelemy, Maureen Bernard Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. Though justice has been brought on Hewerman, there are still 7 other victims whose murders remain unsolved. It's because of this many believe that there is potentially more than one killer who was responsible for the rest of the murders. Mr. Cruel is a serial child rapist who assaulted 3 little girls and is potentially responsible for the death and abduction of a potential 4th victim in the city of Melbourne, Australia. These attacks happened in the late 1980s and early 1990s, but no suspect has been properly named because Mr. Cruel kept his face concealed with a balaclava. There is almost 800 grand worth of US dollars offered as a reward to whoever can identify Mr. Cruel and put him behind bars for good. Bible John took the lives of 3 confirmed victims between 1968 and 1969 in Glasgow, Scotland. John was described as being a slender, tall man with brown, slick-back hair, although there was no substantial person of interest that was properly questioned or even matched the description of our Bible John. Charlie Chopoff was responsible for the deaths of 4 little boys, as well as a 5th failed attempt between 1972 and 1973 in Manhattan, New York. He got his name from his modus operandi, which consisted of mutilating his victims' genitals. The only suspect that was really strongly considered to be Charlie Chopoff was a man by the name of Erno Soto. He was a drug addict and recurring mental health patient. The only real backing behind this theory was the fact that he was caught by police trying to abduct a 9-year-old boy. The only 2 reasons why Soto wasn't properly charged was because his mental health problems deemed him unfit to stand trial, but also the only surviving victim couldn't recognize him as the guy that attacked him. And then finishing off tier 1, we have the Doodler. Between 1974 and 1975 in San Francisco, the Doodler killed 6 victims along with 8 to 10 potential other victims who have been considered to be connected with the case, although unconfirmed. The Doodler got his name from the fact that he drew portraits of his victims before he slaughtered them, and the only real description we have of this guy is him being a skinny black man, as well as the eerie police sketches accompanying that description. It's important to note that all of his victims were gay white men. The only reason why the Doodler was never caught was because these victims never testified in court out of fear that they would be outed as gay. Hi there. Totally not recording this on a different day. Starting off tier 2, we have the Frankfurt Slasher. Between 1985 and 1990, the Frankfurt Slasher was responsible for the murders of at least 9 victims in Frankfurt, Pennsylvania. These victims were all last reported seen with a middle-aged white man. A man by the name of Leonard Christopher was wrongly accused of being the slasher. Police assumed that he was behind the murders of one of the victims, a 46-year-old woman by the name of Carol Dowd. Reading why he was confirmed as a suspect sounds more like the police just wanted to arrest somebody rather than the fact that they actually found the guy who did the murders. The biggest reason why I believe Christopher is innocent is because of the fact he is black, and it appears that the police have just taken another L in this Iceberg. Despite the fact the police were given nothing but positive comments about his demeanor and his personality from friends and family and co-workers, the police still wanted to arrest another black guy just for the hell of it. See, this case baffles me because I don't know why it's becoming a bit of a common trend for the police to look for black people only after the killer is specified to be a white guy.
Are you the black guy that's murdering all these women?
The Honolulu Strangler went on a killing spree between 1985 and 1986. He's killed at least 5 confirmed victims through, you guessed it, strangulation. The only suspect that is strongly believed to be the Strangler is a man by the name of Howard Gay. That being said, the only evidence backing up this theory is all testimonials from his girlfriend. The I-70 killer killed 6 store clerks who worked off the I-70 highway running through the Midwest, which also includes Ohio. These murders all took place in 1992 between Missouri, Indiana, and Kansas. The victims were all robbed at gunpoint and shot to death. It is believed that he potentially killed 3 extra people, but there hasn't been any proper evidence proving any form of a connection. No suspect has been publicly theorized to be the killer, and this is probably the first hardest dead end so far within this Iceberg series. The only real lead the police have was security footage of a nearby robbery that matched the modus operandi of the other I-70 killings. The I-70 killer is not to be confused with the I-70 strangler, who murdered 12 to 13 gay boys between 1990 to 1991. The killer dumped these corpses on the side of I-70 throughout Ohio, Indiana, and Georgia. Unlike the I-70 killer, the strangler was almost caught. A man by the name of Herb Bauermeister was heavily believed to be the suspect after he was last seen with one of the victims. The most damning piece of evidence of all is the fact that there were numerous human remains that were found within his Fox Hollow Farms property. The only reason Baumeister wasn't caught or charged with anything related to the murders is because of the fact he had shot himself before the police could catch him in time. This is going to be the first case so far in the Iceberg where the police almost got the guy, but he took the bitch's way out. The eastbound strangler murdered 4 women and left their remains in a drainage ditch. These murders were speculated to have occurred between October and November of 2006. No notable suspect or lead has properly been considered as being connected to the strangler killings, though, as a bit of a morbid, fun fact, this string of murders was considered to be potentially connected to the Gilgo Beach killings I mentioned earlier in this video. That being said, this was more of a shot in the dark than anything meaningful. The Connecticut River Valley killer was responsible for the deaths of at least 7 confirmed female victims, with an additional 6 that are highly potentially considered as being connected. Once again, no substantial lead or suspect has been named for this case as well. Between 1988 and 1989 in New Bedford, Massachusetts, this serial killer is responsible for the deaths of at least 11 confirmed female victims, with 2 of the victims' remains still not being found as of recording and writing this video. The only potential suspect of this case is a man by the name of Anthony DeGrazia. He knew 4 of the victims, but he never outright confessed to being the killer. But before anything damning could come out against him, DeGrazia had killed himself on July 17, 1990. In a tragic irony, there turned out to be no actual evidence that proved that DeGrazia was even behind the murders, so it's a little up in the air whether or not people think that he did kill these women or he did not. The Axeman of New Orleans was a serial killer who killed at least 10 confirmed victims between May of 1913 and October of 1919. The killer also killed these victims with their own axes. This case is most famously recognized for an incident that took place towards the end of the Axeman killing spree. On March 13, 1919, the Axeman threatened to strike again if people weren't playing jazz in their households past midnight. Of course, everyone in their homes and people in jazz clubs were playing non-stop jazz all night, and the Axeman proved to be a man of his word. That being said, 3 more attacks occurred after this night of jazz. The only real suspect that was considered to potentially be the Axeman is a man by the name of Joseph Mumfree. He's had a pretty shady criminal history, and his time in and out of jail lines up with when the axe murder stopped and resumed. Some additional theories kind of question whether or not there was more than one Axeman, there was more than one really accurate copycat, or if some of the murders were outright unrelated and influenced by personal matters between the victims. Finishing off this tier is the Servant Girl Annihilator, who killed at least 8 confirmed female victims in Austin, Texas between 1884 and 1885. These victims were all female servants, leading to the comically long and, of course, hyperbolic sounding serial killer name. The only 2 notable suspects that were widely considered to be the Annihilator is a 19-year-old by the name of Nathan Elgin and a Malaysian cook by the name of Maurice, no last name or age given. Elgin, being the suspect, has more backing to it because his footprints match some footprints that were left behind on some of the crime scenes. The only reason why Elgin wasn't really charged or questioned with anything is the fact that he was shot by police for trying to assault a girl, so I feel like the police would have had their guy had he not been violent. Maurice is a bit of a special case because there's literally no record of this guy existing other than the same bunch of articles that copy and paste the same fucking paragraph that comes from the Criminal Minds wiki. The only eyebrow-raising detail I would like to include in this topic is the fact that Maurice also supposedly moved out to New Orleans and London following these murders. If you couldn't tell where I was going with that sentence, it is widely believed by some that the Annihilator killings are potentially connected to the Jack the Ripper killings that would take place 3 years later. The only real connection between these 2 cases is the predominantly women victims, as well as the brutality of both of these cases. If I were to talk about the Ripper and the Annihilator potentially being the same person, I couldn't possibly finish off this topic without bringing back our old friend James Maybrick, the suspect who had supposedly confessed to being the Ripper in a diary hidden within his house. The only evidence that even considers Maybrick being both the Ripper and the Annihilator is the fact he would go back and forth constantly between London and America. London was his hometown, while America is where he operated his cotton trading business. I mean, on paper, this could be kind of plausible because, the Ripper killings took place all on weekends, so a business trip back home he could have killed a bunch of girls in Whitechapel. But the issue is, these trips were between Liverpool and New York, which New York is quite a bit away from Texas, and Liverpool is a bit away from Whitechapel. The only piece of writing that even brought this theory into my line of sight treats this idea more like a crossover fan fiction just to get people to read her shitty book. I wouldn't be so hard on it if she didn't tease the book as, I know these killers are the same people, and I'm going to tell you why. Because when you go to actually read the book, she leaves you off with, I know these people are the same, I'm not going to tell you why. So you gotta tell me what you think. By this logic, you could say that the Atlanta Ripper was probably good old Jack and the Annihilator, because the Atlanta Ripper also killed a bunch of female victims who were out late at night. You could even say that he was resurrected by a bunch of Satanists as a puppet to murder even more women or some bullshit. While I am ending off tier 2 with a bit of a bare bones murder case, it somehow found a way to go off the rails. But with that, we now move on to tier 3. This serial killer killed at least 4 confirmed victims between 1976 and 1977 in Oakland County, Michigan. There are also 6 other potential murder victims that were considered to be potentially connected to this case. This case also doesn't have any kind of suspects. While there were multiple people of interest, these people were quickly disproven not to be the killer themselves due to the fact that their DNA didn't match DNA that was left behind as evidence. This is probably the most obscured case so far on this Iceberg series. Between 1990 and 1993, at least 7 teenage girls were abducted and murdered in Calgary, Canada. I don't really want to try and compare like the shock value between all these murder cases, but like doing research on this topic specifically, it threw me off and like kind of made me sad at how little there is about this case. Like I don't know if it's because the Canadian government wants to cover it up, or if it's something I don't understand as an American about how Canada's crimes are published, or if people genuinely just don't care about this case. This is especially considering the fact that this string of murders is a part of an even bigger rabbit hole involving the murders and disappearances of sex workers throughout Canada. Although that being said, not all of these victims were sex workers. Some of them were just women who were at the wrong place at the wrong time, and a scary amount of them were a bunch of indigenous women. Although there are 7 confirmed victims that are connected to this case, it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility that many of the hundreds of women that are going missing or dying to this day are also connected under this same serial killer. The only possible suspect that was even considered to be potentially connected to this case is a man by the name of Barry Niedermeyer. He was caught, arrested, and charged with trying to traffic a 14-year-old girl, and he only served 14 months in jail. That being said, there was no evidence tying him to this string of murders, but I feel like outside of that, it's kind of mind-blowing how Canada and America like to go light on child molesters and everything else underneath. Between 1968 and 1974, at least 10 Japanese women were murdered all throughout Tokyo, the modus operandi being that the killer murdered these women after midnight and set their corpses on fire. Only one suspect was caught and charged for one of the murders, a murder that took place on July 15, 1974, but without Japan publicizes cases like these, there was no public record of both the suspect or the victim. The prime suspect for the rest of this case is a man by the name of Etsuo Ono. The main piece of evidence is his matching blood type as well as his criminal background, causing suspicion and eventually serving as undeniable proof that he has any form of connection to the murders. And then from here, this case kind of goes a bit back and forth like a roller coaster because Ono was in and out of court due to the police mishandling this case. It's because of this mishandling that the public ran with it like it was wildfire and began publicizing Ono as a messiah for how the Japan justice system is corrupt. This publication of Ono as a messiah would eventually blow back up in the public's face when in 1996, there was hard evidence tying him to a murder that involved him proceeding to kill a woman and then set her body on fire, much like the previous other unsolved killings. He also raped a little girl, so he very much deserved to be arrested and sent to jail. But the police also sucked in this case. The only reason why Ono wasn't reinvestigated for these murders is because the statute of limitations expired for the unsolved cases, so there was no chance given to try and reopen this case and try to charge Ono with any form of connection. The Hong-an murders is another unfortunate dead-end case, with somehow there being even less information than the Calgary killings, although the fact that this case took place specifically in China makes me more inclined to believe it's covered up by the government for incompetence or God knows what else. I also don't know how the Chinese likes to publicize these kind of murder cases either, so I can't really be certain. On December 26, 2007 in Hong'an, China, 8 people were brutally murdered with their bodies laid out all throughout a lime factory and accompanied housing owned by one of the victims by the name of Wang Shishu. 4 of these victims were related to Wang, one of them being a 9-year-old child, and the remaining 3 victims were just workers who just so happened to work in the factory. It's from here that this case reaches its hard dead end. Nothing was taken from the factory, and there was no security footage capturing any kind of person of interest that even breathed in the vicinity of these murders. Although, from what I've gathered in my research, it is highly believed that there was someone who had personal grievances with Wang, given that Wang and his family were predominantly the victims. I love when I just can't fucking speak English. A story told throughout my childhood. In 1982, throughout Chicago, Illinois, there were at least 7 people who were killed due to Tylenol pills that were unknowingly contaminated with potassium cyanide. Of the victims who died due to the poisonings, one was a 12-year-old girl by the name of Mary Kellerman. It's because of this incident that we now have tamper-evident safety seals on our medication. The closest thing to a prime suspect for this case is a man by the name of James Lewis, a very sketchy fellow who sent a ransom letter to Johnson & Johnson demanding $1 million, and in return, he would stop the poisonings. Very obviously, this didn't work, but he was only charged with extortion because he didn't match DNA that was found on the contaminated bottles. Lewis also tried to do the whole thinking like the killer shtick to try and make himself seem more innocent, though thanks to his very sketchy personality, it just came off as more suspicious. James died on July 9th of last year, maintaining his innocence. A similar situation to the previous one, throughout 1985, there were a shit ton of contaminated soft drinks that were placed all throughout vending machines in central Japan. There were at least 47 people who were victims of the contaminated drinks, with at least 12 of these people dying due to poisoning. From here, this case reaches a hard dead end due to the fact that there was no security footage capturing any kind of person of interest, plus there was no evidence left behind that could potentially give the police a lead. And then finishing off this tier is the Chillicothe, Ohio killer. Throughout 2014 and 2015, there were at least 7 confirmed female victims all throughout Chillicothe, Ohio. The remains of 2 of these 7 victims still not being found as of filming. A man by the name of Jason McCreary was found guilty for the murders of one of the victims, a 38-year-old Kimberly Clater. Eyewitness testimony as well as security footage helped successfully incriminate and put McCreary behind bars. He was sentenced to life in prison and he died in 2022, with his death for some reason still being under investigation as of filming. For this Iceberg series in specific, I would like to end the video off with an honorable mention that wasn't included in the original Iceberg, but I found it significant enough to include towards the end. For this video specifically, we are going to be looking into the tragically unsolved case of the boy in the box. On February 25th, 1957, a 4-year-old boy was found naked, malnourished, and horribly beaten on the side of a road in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. His body was wrapped in a blanket, and he was found in a cardboard box. If you've seen Shane and Ryan talk about this case, before the controversy of course, then you'll know that this story is more focused on the victim rather than the murderer, because despite police taking his fingerprints and other bits of DNA, this boy was still unidentified. He would go on to be unidentified for 65 whole years until December 8th, 2022, where he was finally identified as 4-year-old Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Though we finally have an answer as to who is America's unknown child, we still don't have an answer as to who was the monster that decided to take his life all those decades ago. Even more tragic is that this killer potentially even took this secret to the grave. I'm sorry I ended the video off on a bit of a depressing note, but I hope that regardless you guys enjoyed this first video back. Once again, now that the summer's here, I'm going to be home all summer. I'm still jobless and I'm potentially dropping out of college, so this YouTube channel is all I really have, given my major turned out to be nothing but a fucking joke. All I can really do for now is try to be my best for you guys and try to boost this channel as best as I can, but I'm not going to give you guys this bullshit sob story. Yada yada yada. If you like this video, like, comment, and subscribe. I guess have an extremely awful day. Hail Satan, and I will see you guys again for part 2 very soon.